This video is a supplemental to the two instructional videos that I have, one for assembling and installing the fuel block, and then the second for assembling and installing the pump and filter package. And what I want to do in this video is just talk about a few tips and tricks that I've learned from guys giving me feedback, customers giving me feedback, and as well some slight improvements that I've made both on the fuel block and as well on the pump and filter package. So where I want to start is some of the tips and tricks that I learned up here. And again, this comes from customers installing the kits. In the installation video for the fuel block, when I talk about removing that mechanical fuel pump, one of the things I say is to go ahead and work the banjo bolt out of the back of it, and then afterwards I say cut the lines in order to get them out from underneath the turbo. So the suggestion there is, well, if you're going to cut the lines to get them out from underneath the turbo, why bother with the banjo bolt? Just cut the lines close back to the banjo bolt itself, and then when you remove the pump, it'll all come out together, and you just remove the two lines after. And that's a really great idea, and it'll save a lot of time. So now the recommendation is don't bother with the banjo bolt. Just go in there, cut the two lines, and get the pump out, and pull out the lines after. The other suggestion was I make a comment in there about positioning the cam to be at a top center, so it kind of pushes the pump up, so you know you're not going to drop the plunger, potentially not drop the plunger into the engine. And the suggestion was, well, you know, if you smack that pump with a hammer or give it a really hard pry, it's going to snap right off in the block, and you'll have that piece of aluminum from the pump in the block, and then you'll have the plunger sticking up out of it. And you can come back after, you pull the pump out of the way, come back after with a pair of vice grip and grab onto the plunger. It'll be sticking up out of the little stub of aluminum left in the block, and pull it all out of there together, and then you don't have the risk at that point of the plunger falling into the engine. I thought that was also a really good suggestion. So again, in that installation video for the fuel block, I don't make any mention about reinstalling the fuel bowl harness. So I've had quite a few guys do this installation. They get through the end, and then the truck won't start, and they email me, they call me, and they say, hey, what's going on? And I walk through the process with them a little bit, and we learn, hey, they didn't reinstall the fuel bowl harness, albeit I don't make any mention in my video to reinstall it, but you do need to reinstall it. It has the injection pressure regulator, which is on the back of the high-pressure oil pump, as part of that harness. So that regulates the high-pressure oil. If you don't put that harness back in, you won't have any high-pressure oil and your engine won't start. Additionally, another good thing off of that harness is you can pick up the old fuel bowl heater wire, and you can use that to trigger your relay for your new fuel pump. That wire gets energized when the key is turned to the run position, and it's de-energized when the key is turned off. So it's a good wire to use for energizing the relay for the pump. Let's see. Another place where guys have been stumped a little bit or tripped up is on the driver's side fitting back here. Let me move the camera around. So again, the goal is kind of not to remove the turbo when doing the installation of my fuel kit. You do have to remove the downpipe because it sits right over that passenger side fitting. There's just no way to get around that. But the good news is that you don't have to remove the turbo. But for the purpose of this video, let me go ahead and pull this turbo up out of here. Now this fitting over here on the driver's side, let me get just a little bit closer, we can see it good. It comes in two different varieties. One is a single piece fitting, like this one right here, and the single piece, when it's in there, it sits just a little bit closer down to the head, a little bit lower to the head than the two-piece does. But really, other than that, there's no big difference between the two. But what's tripping guys up is when I designed this line, this one fuel line here for the driver's side, I did it with this. First off, I did use the one piece. I didn't use the two. I used the single piece fitting. And it's positioned over the one bolt. Let me swing the camera around so you can see what I'm pointing at. This one bolt right here at the top corner of the intake manifold. So position the 90-degree fitting over the top of that bolt, and you'll be successful in getting this line to line up perfectly coming into this fitting. If you have the two-piece fitting, also try to have the two halves lined up in such a way that they make a nice, they're 245, so line them up so that they make a nice 90-degree fitting out of the two pieces, and then sitting right over the top of this bolt right here. I had one gentleman, this was modified in the past, where they had to put a new seal on the old original fuel line, and so they cut the original fuel line short and then put a new seal and put a light flare on it. And to do that, they had to turn this fitting all the way down to be facing this bottom bolt way down here, so it looked like that. And so he got in there and he cut up and hacked up my brand new line I sent him, and then complained because it wouldn't fit, it didn't stretch right. I'm a nice guy, so I just sent him a brand new line and explained to him what to do. He had the two-piece fitting, so that makes it easy to reconfigure it because it won't hit the turbo. These one pieces do. They don't come out without removing the turbo. And I sent him a new line, and he rearranged this fitting right here just like this, and then everything worked perfectly after that. Now additionally, let me pull the camera out of here as I talk a little bit more about this line right here. So these lines are bent up by a mechanical process. I have a homemade tool that I built for doing this, which is this guy sitting right here in the vise right now. And I'm spinning this disc around. You can see it has the degrees 0 through 360 written on it. And then I use this guy right here, the hand bender inside of it. And again, it has degrees listed on it. And so, you know, it's all done by my old fading eyeballs. So the lines might be of a slight variation from one to the next. So one line may just fit perfectly onto the engine, and the next line might need a slight stretch or a slight pull, but it won't be much. I guarantee it won't be much. So my advice is to put them into the fittings at the back of the heads first, both passenger and driver's side. Snug the nut on just a little bit. Don't torque it in there yet. And then if you got to, you know, give the line a slight tug hard towards the block to fit these on and put these guys on tight, and then come back over here and then tighten down the nuts back here. So the other thing to watch for on the driver's side, it's not the problem on the passenger, is make sure this line, as it comes down alongside of the intake manifold, there's a lip that stands up, a standing seam, and there should be plenty of room. I can almost get a finger underneath it here. It should be equal space between this lip of the intake manifold and the pedestal of the turbo when the turbo's up in here. If it's, you know, you don't want it pressing against either of the pedestal or the intake manifold, because abrasion could happen and it could cut this line open. So just something to check for. I don't think it should be a problem, but if it is, you know, again, just give the line a slight push or a pull in a certain direction to stretch it out a little bit to make it a perfect fit. Here are the lines over here on the table. I have a bunch made up, and you can see that to the best of my ability, I keep them all as absolute consistent as possible. I'm very careful as I do the bends to watch the degree marks to make sure I land on them every single time. If you look at this driver stack here again, and you'll see right here, it looks like, at least with the way I have them laying, that, you know, there's a slight variation in this one line right here. So who knows, that one might be the one that fits perfect and all the others need a stretch, or only that one needs a stretch and all the others fit perfect. I hope it's the latter and not the earlier. But again, that's, you know, how these lines are made. So yes, there will be some slight variation, but it shouldn't be very much at all. Okay, so now let's get ourselves back into the stand over here. And following that now, we're going to talk a little bit about the improvement on the kit for the engine, for the fuel block. In the video, the installation video, I say to use the old spring and old valve that comes out of your old pressure regulator on your fuel bowl, and that's not the case anymore. Here I have a half dozen kits ready to ship out, laying on the bench right here. And what I'm doing now is I'm sending a new spring and a new valve body. It's an international part. Let me get up here next to the camera, and so you can see there's a new spring in there and a new valve. And so I've machined the blocks now differently to a different setting, and that takes advantage of using this new spring and new valve in there. It's also, there's an O-ring in there as well. So again, it's preset to 65 psi, and doing it this way now by supplying the spring and valve, I can better guarantee 65 psi, and certainly you'll get much greater longevity out of it having a new spring and a new valve body in there. Okay, let's come over here now, and we're going to talk about the improvements that I've made to the pump bracket. So let me go ahead and pull the camera off of the stand again so I can get down low where the pump bracket is. So what we've been looking at here, this is my test engine sitting down in the shop here, and I use it to make adjustments as I am describing, and improvements here of the fuel block and the pump filter package. So what happened here Here's the old bracket that I was building. Two pieces of aluminum welded together, and the one that holds the pump filter, or the filter heads for the filters, is a flat piece of 3/16 aluminum. And I thought to myself, you know, these filters sometimes get really stuck on there when they've been on there for months or, you know, a year or so. And when you get twisting and torquing trying to take them off, that force might warp or bend this flat piece of aluminum standing up there. And so I redesigned the bracket, that part of the bracket that holds the filter heads, and have my supplier, my metal supplier, CNC cuts out these pieces of 1/8" aluminum now for me, and I here at the shop I bend them. And there's two bends, one big one on the top and one smaller one on the bottom. And I think this will better guarantee that if you're torquing real hard on there trying to get a stubborn filter off, that you're not going to be bending up that piece of the bracket. The other change that I made is I now put these 180-degree fittings on here on each side of the pump. And these hoses are now sent pre-assembled, by the way, because it's a change from my installation video where I use straight fittings on them, and the old hoses from that installation video come and they loop way out here like this and then back to the pump. And I wanted to tighten up the look. That was really the only reason for doing this, was to tighten up the look of it a little bit. So the hoses now come down in between the filters and go off to the 180-degree filter fittings right there on the ends of the pump. And the other variation you have to do now versus what the video shows is to angle these two fittings on the filter heads here. One comes in at about the 7 o'clock position and the other comes in at about the 5 o'clock position. This one runs off to the supply side of the pump. This one runs off over here to the pressure side of the pump. Again, this is the pre-filter, so this is the post-filter. And that's the variation there. If you recall in the video, I show all of them stick, these fittings right here stick straight out away from this mounting surface, and now it's a 5 o'clock or 7 o'clock position on the post-filter and a 5 o'clock position on the pre-filter. I've always supplied these stickers. I've never mentioned them before, but I supply these stickers. One is for the pre-filter, one is for the post-filter. They have the part number on there. And the reason for including them is you can stick them on your bracket if you were to pull both filters off at the same time and have a small brain seizure and you can't remember which side was which. The stickers are on there, and those will remind you as to which side you're supposed to put which filter. So those are the big changes there. One other thing to mention, as you put this installation together and you're going to go to run the pump for the first time, fill both filters, the pre-filter and the post-filter, with diesel fuel before you start up that pump for the first time. The pump will struggle to get fuel pulled through that empty filter. And you know, these pumps are cooled by the fuel running through them, so you run it too long empty like that and the pump's going to get real hot, and you have a potential there for causing some damage. So fill both filters, and note that as you fill the filters, there are paper element inside, so they absorb the diesel fuel. So when you start filling up the pre-filter, you might fill it right to the brim, and if you watch it for a few seconds, you'll see the fuel drop down to about half full. So fill it up again and just keep doing that a couple times as the paper element in there absorbs the fuel until you've got it completely topped off. And then go ahead and screw the filter back onto the housings, and then go ahead and start your pump up. So I've got this guy set up again as my demo block, so we can go ahead and run it here one time. I've got a switch mounted on the front coming off of the battery you see sitting on the floor right there, and that runs the pump, which will then give us 65 psi on this guy. See if I can get focused in and get the light so that we can see the dial. I think we see it okay right there, and we're humming along very well at 65 psi, and it'll go like that all day long for as long as that battery can keep up. So those are the big improvements. We'll go ahead and turn that off. Again, I encourage and ask for feedback of any kind, good or bad. Constructive criticism is welcomed versus straight out criticism. Anything I can do to try to make things a little bit better, a little bit easier, anything I can help and suggest out to new folks doing installations, again with tips and tricks, is appreciated. The one last thing that I'm being asked for, I originally started with doing the fuel block kit, and then I was asked to do the pump and filter package, which I've done. And now I'm being asked to round the whole thing out by including or creating a electrical installation harness to go with all of this to simplify things. So to date, I haven't been doing the electrical portion of it. I've been leaving that up to the end customer, and that's worked out successful. But there are some guys out there that would prefer to have something that's more readily plug and play, and so I am working on an electrical system for all of this and hope to have that coming soon. So until then, take care and talk to you soon.